Today, we're going to explore how to identify some dependent and independent quantities in word problems. Being able to identify which quantity is independent and which quantity is dependent in a word problem is important in understanding the relationship between the quantities in that problem. To begin, let's look at the definition for each of these quantities. The independent quantity is the quantity whose value does not depend on the other quantity. The dependent quantity is the quantity whose value depends on the other quantity. You'll notice that depend is in the name, which can help you remember that the dependent quantity depends on the other. To better understand each type of quantity, we'll examine a few word problems now. Kayla is picking grapes to make grape jelly. The number of jars she will be able to fill with jelly depends on the number of grapes that she picks. Which of the quantities is dependent and which is independent? Let J equal the number of jars Kayla will be able to fill, and G equal the number of grapes Kayla picks. The wording of the question helps us to figure out which quantity is which. The question says the number of jars she will be able to fill with jelly depends on the number of grapes that she picks. Remember, by definition, the dependent quantity is the quantity that depends on the other one. And since the number of jars, J, depends on the number of grapes that she picks, J is the dependent quantity. This makes G the independent quantity, as G, the number of grapes that she picked, does not depend on J. But no matter how many jars she's able to fill, grape jelly is always delicious. Let's work out another example. Trey's making embroidered patches for his business. The number of orders determines the amount of material Trey will need to order for the embroidery machine. Which quantity is the dependent quantity? O equals the number of orders from customers, and M equals the amount of material needed. And just like in the previous example, the wording of the problem is going to help us to determine the dependent quantity. And the question says the number of orders determines the amount of material needed. And the key word here is determines. Since the number of orders determines the amount of material needed, we know that the amount of material depends on the number of orders. And this makes the amount of material needed, or M, our dependent quantity. And let's just look at one last example now. Pierre is getting ready for a hike. The longer he expects to hike, the more snacks he'll pack. Which quantity is the independent quantity? Let's let H be the number of hours he expects to be gone, and S be the number of snacks that he packs. Notice here we're looking for the independent quantity, and in order to find it, we can look more closely at the wording of the question. We know that the number of hours that he expects to hike will influence how many snacks he packs. So if you think about it, you can see that the number of snacks, S, depends on the number of hours he expects to be gone, H. Since S depends on H, S is the dependent quantity. That means that H is the independent quantity here, as the number of hours Pierre expects to be gone is not affected by how many snacks that he packs. And no matter how long you hike for, having snacks is always a good idea. Alright, quick recap. When solving word problems with both independent and dependent quantities. Identifying each type will help you to understand the relationship between the quantities. Remember, a dependent quantity's value depends on the other quantity, and an independent quantity's value does not depend on the other quantity.